Here are my 8 tips for learning Spanish as easily as possible. And this is coming from someone who started learning Spanish in their late 20s. I mean, I took a few classes in high school, but didn't really learn much. So I actually officially learned probably starting around the age 24. And now 10 years later, my Spanish is pretty good, quite fluent. I get a lot of compliments on it. So I think you can do it too, even as an adult. But my first tip is that you give yourself time to learn it. You're not going to learn Spanish in a day or a week or a month. Now, there's a possibility that if you dove right into another country, full immersion, went and lived with like a Spanish-speaking family within that country, and all you did was speak in Spanish, and you intentionally did so, and you avoided all English altogether, could you be speaking Spanish within a couple months? Yes, you could, definitely. I'm sure you could be doing that. Now, realistically, if you did that and you moved down into another country and you were taking some lessons and things like that, I imagine almost anyone could be fluent in that language within 6 months, as long as you're actually working on it and pushing yourself towards it. Because if you're not doing that, yeah, it could take a few years before you are actually able to be fluent and confident in your second language. And so that leads me into my second tip, which is how to stay focused. And I would say take a class, definitely, or get a tutor who keeps you on a schedule, because this regimented practice and forcing it into your life is what's going to actually help you learn. Now, there's a big possibility that you could move down to somewhere in Mexico and you could live in a place like Puerto Vallarta or Merida where there's a lot of expats, and you might not ever need Spanish, so it's going to take a really long time to learn it. So I would say stay focused and set yourself to a schedule to learn the language and do it. And that leads me into my third tip, which is don't be afraid to make mistakes in front of others. Now, you might do this while you're practicing in class, but also going out in public, it's going to be even a little bit more intimidating because you're actually trying to get things done. Maybe you're, looking for some business, or you need the restroom or something like that. You want to be able to communicate a little bit, and I want you to not be afraid if you make mistakes. Try to think of yourself when you're learning your second language and you're speaking to locals and you're doing it for the first time. Try to think of yourself as like a toddler, how they practice their language. They're constantly making grammatical mistakes. They're constantly using the wrong word or something like that, but they're not beating themselves up over it. They're just doing it, they're practicing it, and then they absorb and correct as time goes on. I want you to do the same thing. Have a little bit of humility, and don't be afraid to sound or look silly in front of other people. And I know that's difficult. It takes a little bit of practice, but I think you can get through it, and eventually the more you practice, the easier it gets. And so this leads me to my next tip, which is that if you're not able to feel confident in how well you can express yourself linguistically and verbally, just please use the words you know and express yourself holistically. That is, try pantomiming things out, try charading things to people, because that can really help you get words out, or they'll say the word to you that you're trying to mock up and imitate, and then you can learn the word that way. So try doing things like that. Don't be afraid to use stuff like onomatopoeias and facial gestures and all kinds of things. And if you really need to go back up into your phone and just use like Google Translate, that always works as well. But I really encourage you to just go be confident and express yourself holistically. My fifth tip after you're done expressing yourself is to listen very carefully. And that's partly because when you're listening to a new language, there's actually some sounds that you legitimately cannot hear until you get used to hearing them. And moreover, you're not going to be able to reproduce those sounds until you know exactly the sound that they're making. And that's just because when we're babies, we get trained to just think and speak and listen in our own language, and not every language shares the exact same sounds. And so as we grow up, we kind of filter out the stuff we don't need. But once you start listening in the new language, it's literally a new muscle that you're training. So pay attention very carefully when you're listening. Try to watch people's mouths as they move. Try to see how they're moving their tongue and things like that. And it will help you not only understand what they're saying, but then be able to reproduce those sounds yourself. And my sixth tip for doing just that is to listen to music in another language. I think this is really important because it's not always easy to understand what people are even singing in English sometimes. It's like, what did they just sing? So when you're listening in another language, you're really kind of picking up on some of of the most difficult ways in which people produce that language. And if you can get used to that, then it's really easy to listening to people speak. But you can also just, learn new words as well as you're listening to a song. It might be like, oh, I really like this song, but I don't know what they're saying. And now I want to go into the lyrics and I want to read it and then, make sure I have the lyrics down as I'm singing to myself in this other language. And then all of a sudden you kind of embed that word into your vernacular as well. So give that a shot. Listen to their music. And another tip would be to turn on your Netflix or your Blu-rays, especially the ones that you have memorized already word for word if you're that kind of person, and listen to them in the other language. So go try that. You're gonna pick up on how they actually speak in that language. If you turn on the subtitles as well, you might actually find that what they're saying verbally is different from what they are writing on the page. And that's just because a lot of the times it's probably closer to the literal translation in the subtitle, and then it's closer to how they actually speak through the verbal. So that's always an interesting differentiation as well. But moreover, if you have those subtitles on, you can be reading the words as you're hearing them, and that gets you a lot better at reading and writing and listening as well as speaking, because then you can kind of say, oh, he said this, that's how it's spelled. Now I can really reproduce it really well because I kind of make the connection between the audio and how it's written and how I'm actually speaking. And my last recommendation, and this is definitely not going to be for everybody, especially the teetotalers in my audience, but I recommend that you go have some drinks and just start talking to locals, because having like a drink and loosening yourself up just a little bit when you're speaking another language actually kind of reduces the inhibitions that you have when you are completely sober. It's like, oh, I'm so self-conscious. I don't want to say anything wrong at all. I don't want to stutter. I don't want to use the wrong word. I don't want to sound like a baby. Well, I've found personally that, once I have like a beer and I start speaking in Spanish, it's just like boom, boom, boom. It's like self-fluent. I don't even know why. So it might work for you too. If you don't like to drink, please don't do that. And please don't overdrink yourself. I'm not recommending any kind of like binging or, drinking yourself to death. Just be smart. And if you like this video, please tap that like button and let me know down in the comments what your biggest hurdle is when learning another language like Spanish.